The most expensive mistakes you will ever make in your life are not the ones you see coming. They are not the dramatic failures. They are not the catastrophic decisions that arrive with warning sirens and red flags and the specific quality of obvious danger that forces your attention. Those mistakes you can prepare for. Those you can see approaching and build the defenses that reduce the damage before it arrives. The expensive mistakes, the ones that cost you your position, your peace, your relationships, your sense of yourself, are the ones that start so small that ignoring them feels like the reasonable thing to do. A comment that stings but does not seem worth addressing. A pattern that nags but does not seem worth naming. A behavior from someone in your life that crosses a line so thin that the crossing barely registers and the confrontation feels like it would cost more than the violation. So you let it go. You tell yourself it was nothing. You move on, and the behavior happens again, and you let it go again, and again, and again. Until one day you look up and realize that what you let go 100 times has built something inside the relationship that cannot be undone by addressing it now. The pattern has been established, the terms have been set, and the terms were set by your silence. By the 100 small moments where the reasonable thing to do was to let it go and the correct thing to do was to name it, and you chose reasonable over correct because correct felt expensive in the moment. Machiavelli understood this dynamic with the precision of a man who had watched it destroy more capable people than any battle or political disaster ever did. He wrote in The Prince about the specific danger of small injuries. Injuries that are too minor to justify a full response, but significant enough to accumulate over time into a structural vulnerability that no full response can repair once it has been built. He observed, across every court and council and political environment he worked in over 15 years, that the men who fell hardest were almost never the men who were defeated by a single decisive blow. They were the men who tolerated a series of small violations, each one individually too minor to justify the cost of confrontation, until the accumulated weight of the toleration had changed how the room related to them permanently. This video is about 5 specific behaviors. Not 20, not 10, 5. Because these 5 are the ones that, left unaddressed, compound faster and cost more than any other behaviors you will encounter in your professional and personal life. Each one seems small when it first appears. Each one has a reasonable explanation that makes the ignoring feel like the mature response. And each one, ignored consistently over time, builds a structural problem in the relationship and in your positioning that becomes catastrophically expensive to repair the longer it is allowed to continue. And here is the part that makes the ignoring so psychologically understandable and so structurally destructive at the same time. Every time you ignore one of these behaviors, you do not just let the moment pass. You install a new norm. The behavior that was not addressed becomes the behavior that is permitted, and permitted behavior does not ask for permission the next time it shows up. It simply arrives. With more confidence, with less care about how it lands, with the specific energy of something that has tested the boundary and found it absent. You are not just tolerating a moment, you are constructing a precedent. And precedents, as Machiavelli documented across every political environment he ever studied, are the most durable and the most difficult to reverse of any structure that human beings build between themselves. Because a precedent does not need to be argued for, it simply exists. And something that simply exists is always harder to dismantle than something that had to be argued for before it was allowed. If you have been telling yourself that something is nothing, if there is a behavior in your life right now that nags at you in the quiet moments and that you have been dismissing as not worth the energy of addressing, this video is going to show you why the nothing is the most dangerous thing in your environment, and why the price of continuing to ignore it is a price you cannot afford to keep paying. Comment the words "I stop ignoring," like this video, because every like puts it in front of someone who is still letting something small become something structural. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. And drop your location and the time right now. This community is real, and right now it matters who is here. Behavior 1. The person who tests your boundaries with small violations to see what you will tolerate before they escalate to the violations that actually matter. Let me tell you why this is the first behavior in the video, and why recognizing it will save you more grief than any other piece of awareness in your entire life. The person who is going to cause you the most damage does not start with the big violation. They never start there. They start with a small one. The comment that is slightly dismissive but not dismissive enough to confront. The promise that is slightly broken but not broken enough to justify a conversation about it. The line that is slightly crossed but not crossed enough that drawing attention to it would seem proportionate to the size of the violation. Each of these small tests is probing. Not necessarily consciously, not always with deliberate strategic intent, but probing. Because the small violation that goes unaddressed communicates something to the person who committed it that shapes every subsequent interaction. This person will tolerate this. And this, the specific quality and the specific degree of the violation that was permitted, becomes the new baseline from which the next violation is measured. Most people tolerate the small violation because addressing it feels like overreacting. The cost of the confrontation seems larger than the cost of the violation. Machiavelli would never tolerate the small violation. Here is what he would do instead. He observed in The Prince that the prince who permits small offenses without response has taught his subjects that offenses are tolerable. And tolerability, once established, does not stay at the level where it was established. It drifts, it escalates. Because the person who committed the small violation and received no consequence has learned something specific. The consequence threshold is above the level of what they just did. And human beings, operating from the self-interested psychology that Machiavelli documented with such consistent accuracy, will naturally test the space between what they have done and what they believe the consequence threshold to be. Each test pushes slightly higher than the last. Each absence of consequence raises the ceiling slightly, until the violations that are occurring bear no resemblance to the small test that started the sequence, and the person who has been tolerating them cannot quite explain how things got here because each individual step along the way seemed too minor to justify the full confrontation. Here is a specific example that will make this land in your actual life. A colleague at work makes a slightly dismissive comment about your contribution in a meeting. Nothing dramatic. A half joke. The kind of thing that, if addressed directly, would make you seem oversensitive, so you let it go. The next week, the dismissiveness is slightly more pointed, still within the range of plausible deniability. Still dressed up as humor or directness, or just the way they are. You let it go again. By the third month, the pattern has been established so firmly that the colleague treats your contributions with a casual disregard that has become the default of the relationship. And the confrontation you should have had in week 1, the brief, calm, warm, but firm acknowledgement that the dismissiveness was noticed and was not going to become a pattern, would now require an entirely different kind of conversation. A conversation about an established dynamic rather than a single incident. A conversation that carries the accumulated weight of 3 months of permission that you granted through your silence. Machiavelli would tell you this very directly. The cheapest confrontation you will ever have is the first one. The one that addresses the small violation when it is still small. When the behavior can be named without the naming feeling disproportionate. And the person who committed it can adjust without the adjustment feeling like a defeat. Every confrontation after the first one costs more. Because the pattern has deepened, the terms have been established, and the person you are now confronting is not the person who committed the first small violation. They are the person who has been committing escalating violations for months without consequence. And that person's relationship to your boundaries is fundamentally different from the person who crossed the line once and could have been corrected easily if you had spoken in the moment when speaking was cheap. Let me give you the specific practice that makes this behavior stoppable. The next time the small violation arrives, the dismissive comment, the slightly broken promise, the thin line that gets crossed, do this. Do not confront. Do not escalate. Do not match the emotional temperature of the violation with the emotional temperature of the response. Simply name it. Calmly, warmly, without the charge that would give the other person something to react to. Something like, I noticed that, and I want to make sure it does not become a pattern. That sentence does not accuse. It does not dramatize. It simply communicates that the behavior was observed and that the observation is being filed. And that communication, that simple, low-cost, non-confrontational naming, is the thing that prevents the escalation. Because the escalation depends on the silence. It depends on the behavior going unnamed. And a named behavior is a behavior that the other person now knows is being tracked. And tracked behavior, in any environment where reputation matters, is behavior that people adjust. Machiavelli would tell you something very direct about this. He would say, the prince who addresses the small offense early spends 1 minute of discomfort preventing a year of structural damage. The prince who waits spends a year of structural damage earning the right to a confrontation that now costs 100 times what it would have cost in the first week. The math is not complicated. The first conversation is always the cheapest one. Every conversation after that gets more expensive. Have the cheap one. Skip the expensive one. That is the entire strategy. Comment. I address it the first time if you just recognized something in your life that started small and became structural because you kept letting it go. Behavior 2. The person who remembers every favor they did for you but forgets every favor you did for them. My friend, this behavior is one of the most psychologically sophisticated and one of the most invisible forms of manipulation that exists in ordinary human relationships. It does not look like manipulation. It looks like someone who is keeping track, someone who is organized about the give and take of the relationship, someone who knows what they have contributed and is not shy about referencing it when the context calls for it. And the referencing always seems reasonable. It always seems justified. It always seems like the natural behavior of a person who gives generously and simply wants the generosity to be acknowledged. But here is what you need to watch for. The same person who remembers their own contributions with such precision has a strangely imprecise memory of yours. The time you went out of your way to help them, they recall it vaguely, if at all. The effort you made that cost you significantly, they reference it briefly and without the emotional weight that their own contributions seem to carry when they reference those. The pattern is not that they do not remember, it is that they remember selectively. And the selectivity serves a specific function. It constructs a narrative in which they are the generous party and you are the recipient, in which the balance of the relationship is tipped in their direction, in which you owe more than you have given, even when the reality, the actual, measurable, documented reality, is the opposite. Machiavelli observed this dynamic in political alliances with the precision of someone who had been on both sides of the selective ledger. He documented that the most effective way to maintain leverage in any ongoing relationship was to ensure that the other party's perception of the balance was always slightly in your favor. Not through lying about what you had given, through the strategic amplification of your own contributions and the quiet minimization of theirs. The amplification is not dramatic. It is the slightly more vivid retelling of what you did. the slightly more emotional reference to the cost it carried, the slightly more frequent mention of the moment when you showed up. And the minimization is equally subtle. The slightly briefer acknowledgement of what they did, the slightly less emotional reference to their contribution, the slightly less frequent mention of the moments when they were the ones who showed up. Here is the tell. In a healthy relationship, both people have an approximately balanced picture of what each has contributed. Neither person keeps a running total. Neither person references their own generosity with significantly more frequency or emotion than they reference the other person's. The relationship feels mutual in a way that does not require accounting because the accounting is roughly equal, and both parties sense it without needing to track it. When you are in a relationship with someone who displays this behavior, the accounting always feels tilted. You always feel like you owe slightly more than you are owed. You always feel the vague, nagging, difficult to articulate sense that the balance is not what the other person says it is, but you cannot quite make the case because their memory of their own contributions is so precise and so vivid that it outweighs your more modest recall of your own. Machiavelli would tell you to start keeping your own record, not as a weapon, as a defense. When you have a clear picture of what you have actually given and what you have actually received, the selective ledger of the other person cannot govern how you feel about the balance. You have your own data, and your own data, held clearly and with confidence, is the thing that prevents the other person's narrative from becoming the only narrative available. Let me give you a specific scenario that will make this immediately recognizable. You have a friend who helped you move apartments 2 years ago. A genuine act of generosity. They were there. They showed up. They carried boxes. And since that day, the moving day has been referenced approximately 7 times in conversations about the friendship, in moments where a favor is being requested, in the specific, subtle, apparently casual mention that arrives just before an ask that you would have declined if the mention had not preceded it. Meanwhile, you helped this same friend through a professional crisis 6 months ago. You spent hours, you listened. You gave genuine, specific, actionable advice that they later told you made a material difference in how the situation resolved. That contribution has been referenced once, briefly, without the emotional weight that the moving day carries every time it resurfaces. The ledger is operating, not consciously in most cases, but operating, and the ledger says, I gave more, you received more. The balance is in my favor, and the felt sense of that balance, which lives in you as a vague, difficult to articulate feeling of owing, is governing how you respond to requests, how you set boundaries, and how much of yourself you give to this relationship. The ledger is running the relationship, and the ledger is wrong, because the ledger is selective, and selective ledgers always favor the person who is maintaining them. Here is what Machiavelli would do. He would not challenge the ledger openly. He would not say you are remembering selectively. He would simply keep his own, clearly, accurately, without the selective amplification that the other person is applying. And the next time the selective reference arrives, the next time the moving day resurfaces as evidence of the other person's generosity, he would hold his own record internally with enough clarity and enough confidence that the felt sense of owing does not produce the automatic compliance it used to. That is the defense, not arguing about the ledger, knowing your own. Comment, I keep my own record if this just named a dynamic you have been feeling without being able to prove. Behavior 3. The person who is warm to you in private but cold or dismissive in public. Before I get into why this behavior is so dangerous and why ignoring it compounds faster than almost any other behavior in this video, let me tell you why it is so hard to address. The person who does this gives you everything you need in private. The warmth is real. The connection feels genuine. The one-on-one dynamic is good, sometimes very good. And because the private version is the version you spend the most intimate time with, you begin to believe that the private version is the real one, and the public version is the anomaly. The occasional coldness in front of other people, the slight dismissiveness when an audience is present, the specific shift in how they relate to you when the dynamic moves from just the two of you to a group where other people are watching. You tell yourself the public version is just how they are in groups, that they are less comfortable in social settings, that the private warmth is the truth and the public coldness is the performance. Machiavelli would tell you the opposite. He would tell you very directly, the public version is the real one. Here is why. Machiavelli observed that when a person's behavior shifts based on who is watching, the version that appears in front of the audience is the version that serves the person's strategic interests. The private warmth costs nothing. It is delivered in a context where no one else is evaluating the dynamic. The public coldness costs something. It costs your standing in the eyes of the people who are watching. And the person who is willing to pay that cost, who is willing to diminish you in front of an audience, has told you something about how they value you relative to how they value the audience's perception of them. The audience matters more than your dignity. That is the message. And the message, however much the private warmth contradicts it, is the one you should be listening to. Here is what this behavior costs you if you ignore it. Every public interaction where you are treated with less warmth than the private dynamic would predict erodes your standing in the eyes of the observers. The room watches. The room notices the asymmetry. The room forms conclusions about your position based on how this person treats you in contexts where the treatment is visible. And the room's conclusions, once formed, shape how the room treats you independently of what this person does. You are being diminished in public by someone who replenishes you in private. And the replenishment always feels like enough to justify continuing the relationship. But the diminishment is accumulating in the minds of every observer. And the accumulated diminishment changes your position in ways that no amount of private warmth can repair. Machiavelli would never tolerate this behavior. He would do something that most people find very difficult. He would address the gap, not angrily, not dramatically, with the calm, direct, compositionally settled acknowledgement that the difference between the private version and the public version has been noticed, and that the difference is not acceptable. Something like, I have noticed that how you relate to me shifts when other people are present, and I need you to know that the shift is visible and that it matters to me. That sentence, delivered calmly and without the emotional charge that would invite the other person to reframe the conversation as your oversensitivity, does something that silence cannot do. It closes the gap, not because the other person will necessarily change immediately, because the gap has been named. And a named gap is a gap that can no longer operate in the comfortable invisibility that the silence was providing. Let me tell you why this behavior compounds faster than almost any other behavior in this video. Every public interaction where you are treated with less warmth or respect than the private dynamic would suggest is being witnessed. And the witnesses are forming conclusions, not about the other person, about you. Because the room does not know about the private warmth. The room only sees the public treatment. And the public treatment, observed consistently, becomes the room's understanding of your position in this relationship. If someone treats you as lesser in front of other people, even subtly, even with deniability, even in ways that could be explained away as personality or mood, the room files you accordingly. And the filing, done consistently across enough public interactions, changes how the room itself treats you. Not just in this relationship. In every interaction that is influenced by the observer's assessment. Machiavelli would say this very directly. The damage of the public-private gap is not the damage to the relationship. The relationship may survive it indefinitely because the private warmth keeps replenishing what the public coldness drains. The damage is to your position, to your reputation, to how the room evaluates your standing based on the observable evidence of how the people closest to you treat you when others are watching. And that damage, once it is installed in the room's assessment, requires far more effort to repair than the single conversation that would have prevented it. Here is one more thing about this behavior that I need you to hear. If you address the gap and the person responds with genuine willingness to change, if they hear you, acknowledge the pattern, and adjust their public behavior to match the private warmth, then you are with someone who is operating from habit rather than intention. And habits can be corrected. But if you address the gap and the person dismisses it, minimizes it, or makes you feel like the problem for noticing it, if the naming itself is treated as an overreaction to something that was not really happening, then you are dealing with behavior 7 from the previous video in this series. The perception doubt installation. And the combination of the public-private gap and the perception doubt is one of the most structurally damaging combinations available in any human relationship. Comment I name the gap between the private and the public if you just recognize this behavior in someone in your life. Behavior 4. The person who subtly reframes your achievements as luck, timing, or circumstances rather than capability. My friend, this behavior is one of the slowest and most invisible forms of erosion that exists in any professional or personal relationship. It does not look like an attack. It does not feel like a confrontation. It arrives in the form of a compliment that has a quiet poison built into its structure. Something like, "You really got lucky with that one," or "The timing worked out perfectly for you," or "You were in the right place at the right time." Each of these statements, taken individually, seems generous. It seems like someone acknowledging something good that happened to you. And because it is wrapped in the language of acknowledgement, the poison at its center goes undetected. The poison is this: the achievement has been separated from you. The success has been attributed to circumstances rather than to capability. And the room, hearing this reframing, files it accordingly. Not, "This person is excellent at what they do," but, "This person got fortunate." And the difference between those two filings, accumulated across months and years of subtle reframing, is the difference between a reputation built on recognized capability and a reputation built on perceived luck. And a reputation built on luck does not hold up when luck is not present. The first time something does not go well, the room's assessment shifts immediately. The luck ran out. Because the capability was never installed in the assessment. Because someone spent months quietly removing it. Machiavelli observed this technique in political environments where reputation was the primary currency of influence. He documented that one of the most effective ways to undermine a rival without appearing to attack them was to subtly reattribute their successes to factors other than their own competence. Not by criticizing them, by praising the circumstances. What a fortunate moment for you. The conditions were perfect. Everything aligned in your favor. Each statement is technically positive. Each one removes one more brick from the foundation of the rival's reputation as someone whose success is the product of their own capability rather than the product of their environment. Here is the tell. The person who genuinely admires your achievements gives you credit. Directly. Without the qualifier that redirects the credit to the situation. They say, "You did an incredible job with that." They say, "Your work on that was outstanding." They say that success is a direct reflection of your capability. The person who is subtly undermining your reputation says, "The timing really worked in your favor." The difference is in what gets credited. If you are credited, you are being built up. If the circumstances are credited, you are being moved aside while the acknowledgement is given to the context, rather than to the person who produced the result. Most people never address this because addressing it sounds like vanity, like saying, "Actually, it was not luck, it was me." That response feels self-aggrandizing, and most people would rather absorb the subtle diminishment than appear arrogant by correcting it. Machiavelli would handle this differently. He would not correct the reframing with a defensive claim about his own capability. He would correct it with a result. He would produce the next achievement under conditions that could not be attributed to luck or timing. And then the next one. And the next. Until the pattern of consistent excellence made the luck-based reframing impossible to sustain. Because luck does not repeat itself consistently, and capability does. The reframing loses credibility the moment the track record becomes too consistent to explain away as circumstance. Your job is to build the track record, and to recognize, while you are building it, that the person who has been reframing your achievements as luck is not your ally. They are your competitor, and they have been competing from a position that your silence has been subsidizing. Let me give you a specific way to handle this starting this week. The next time someone reframes your achievement as luck or timing, the next time the credit gets redirected from your capability to your circumstances, do not correct them defensively. Correct them factually, not with emotion, with a calm, warm, entirely non-confrontational statement that puts the credit back where it belongs. Something like, "I appreciate that, but the outcome was actually the result of specific decisions I made and work I put in over several months." That sentence does not argue, it does not accuse. It simply restates the fact. And the fact, stated calmly and without the defensiveness that would invite the other person to dismiss it as insecurity, lands in the room as a correction of the record, not as a confrontation, as a fact. Machiavelli would tell you that the person who corrects the record calmly and consistently builds a reputation that the reframing cannot erode, because the reframing depends on the correction not being made. It depends on your silence, on your willingness to let the luck-based narrative stand because correcting it feels arrogant. The correction, delivered without arrogance and without heat, is not arrogance. It is accuracy. And accuracy, held consistently, builds the kind of reputation that no amount of subtle undermining can dismantle. Because the room has heard both versions, the luck version and the capability version, and the capability version, delivered by the person who actually did the work, carries more weight than the luck version delivered by someone who did not. My friend, here's one more thing about this behavior that connects it to everything Machiavelli understood about reputation. Your reputation is not built by what you say about yourself. It is built by what you allow to be said about you. The person who allows the luck-based reframing to stand has allowed a false narrative to enter the record uncorrected. And the record, once it contains the uncorrected narrative, carries it forward into every future assessment. Correct the record every time, not loudly, factually, and let the consistency of the correction build the reputation that the reframing was designed to prevent. Comment, "I credit my own capability" if this just showed you someone in your life who has been moving the credit away from you and toward the circumstances. Halfway through this video, I want to be direct with you. If these 4 behaviors have been naming things you recognized in your own environment, you need the 5th one more than all 4 of them combined. Behavior 5 is the one that does the deepest damage and the one that is hardest to see because it disguises itself as something that looks like love. Subscribe right now. Hit the notification bell. Stay. Behavior 5, the person who punishes your independence with withdrawal of warmth. This is the last behavior, and it is the most important one in this video, not because it is the most dramatic, because it is the most invisible. And the most invisible forms of control are always the most dangerous, because they operate without the target ever clearly seeing what is happening. Here is what this behavior looks like. You do something independent. You make a decision without consulting the person. You spend time with people outside the relationship. You pursue a goal or an interest that does not include them. You exercise the basic, healthy, entirely normal autonomy that any person in any relationship is entitled to exercise. And what follows is not a confrontation, not a conversation, not a direct statement of displeasure. What follows is a shift, a cooling, a withdrawal of the warmth that was present before the independent action occurred. The text responses become shorter, the tone becomes flatter, the engagement becomes less energetic. The person is still present. They are still technically available, but the quality of their presence has changed in a way that communicates, without words, that your independence has been registered and that it has a cost. The cost is the warmth. Most people do not see this as manipulation because the withdrawal does not announce itself as punishment. It announces itself as mood, as tiredness, as having a lot going on right now, as one of the 1,000 reasonable explanations that are available for why someone's energy has shifted. And because the explanations are reasonable, the independent person does something that the manipulation is specifically designed to produce. They adjust. They modify the independent behavior. They include the other person more. They check in more frequently. They make the choices that restore the warmth by reducing the independence that triggered the cooling. And the cycle repeats. Independence, cooling, adjustment, restored warmth. Independence, cooling, adjustment, restored warmth. Each cycle teaching the same lesson. Your independence has a price. The price is my warmth. And my warmth, which you have become dependent on, is more expensive to lose than your independence is to keep. Machiavelli would recognize this instantly as the most efficient form of control available in any relationship. He observed in The Prince that the most effective rulers did not control their subjects through force. They controlled them through the management of reward and punishment. And the most efficient form of punishment was not the infliction of pain, but the withdrawal of something valued. The withdrawal does not require confrontation. It does not require the expenditure of energy that direct conflict demands. It simply requires the removal of something the other person has been receiving consistently enough that its absence is felt as a loss. And loss, as Machiavelli documented with devastating precision, is the most powerful motivator of behavioral change available in any human dynamic. Here is what makes this behavior so dangerous when it is ignored. Each cycle of the pattern deepens the dependency on the warmth, while simultaneously narrowing the range of independent behavior that the warmth giver will tolerate. The independent person does not notice the narrowing because each individual adjustment seems small. Each concession of autonomy seems reasonable. Each modification of behavior in the direction of the other person's comfort seems like the natural accommodation that any healthy relationship requires. But the accumulation, the slow, steady, cycle-by-cycle narrowing of the space within which you are permitted to operate without triggering the cooling, produces a dynamic that, after enough cycles, no longer resembles a relationship between equals. It resembles a relationship between a person who controls the temperature and a person who has learned to stay inside the narrow band where the temperature is comfortable. Machiavelli would never allow the warmth to become the lever. Here is what he would do. He would notice the cooling after the first independent action. He would register it internally. He would name it to himself clearly. The warmth was withdrawn because I acted independently. That naming does not require confrontation. It requires awareness. And the awareness changes the next decision. Because the next time the cooling arrives, the next time independence triggers the withdrawal of warmth, the aware person does not adjust. They hold. They let the cooling happen. They sit inside the discomfort of reduced warmth without modifying the independent behavior that triggered it. And that holding, that deliberate, uncomfortable, genuinely difficult refusal to trade independence for warmth is the thing that breaks the cycle, because the cycle depends on the adjustment. The adjustment is the engine. Remove the adjustment, and the engine stalls. And a stalled engine produces one of two outcomes. The person doing the cooling recognizes that the lever has stopped working and adjusts their own behavior. Or the person doing the cooling escalates to a more overt form of pressure that can be addressed directly because it is no longer disguised as mood. Either outcome is better than the cycle, Either outcome produces clarity, and clarity, my friend, even when it is painful, is always cheaper than the cost of continuing to trade your autonomy for the controlled warmth of someone who has been using the warmth as a leash. My friend, I need you to sit with this one for a moment before I close the video, because it is the behavior that costs the most, and the one that most people never identify as manipulation because it wears the disguise of love so convincingly. The warmth withdrawal feels like the natural consequence of having hurt someone. It feels like you did something wrong by acting independently, and the cooling is the evidence of the hurt you caused. And that framing, which the person doing the withdrawing may genuinely believe rather than consciously constructing, is what makes the cycle so difficult to break. Because you do not see yourself as being controlled. You see yourself as having hurt someone you care about by being too independent. And the adjustment you make, the reduction of your independence, the increased consultation, the modified behavior that restores the warmth, feels like the loving response to having caused pain, rather than the compliance response to having been pressured. Here is what Machiavelli would say to you about this, and he would say it with genuine care because this is the behavior that causes the most genuine suffering in the people who experience it without seeing it. He would say, the person who withdraws warmth when you exercise independence is not being hurt by your independence. They are being threatened by your independence. And hurt and threatened are two fundamentally different things that produce the same visible response withdrawal but come from two completely different places. Hurt comes from caring about the relationship. Threatened comes from needing to control the relationship. And the person who withdraws warmth specifically in response to your independent behavior is not caring about the relationship. They are maintaining their position within it, and their position requires your dependence. Your dependence requires your adjustment. Your adjustment requires the warmth withdrawal to be effective, and the effectiveness requires you to believe that the withdrawal is about their pain rather than about your control. See it, name it internally, and the next time the cooling arrives after an independent action, hold. Do not adjust. Let the discomfort come. Let the reduced warmth sit in the relationship without your rushing to restore it through the modification of your behavior. Because the behavior you would be modifying is not the behavior that hurts someone, it is the behavior that threatens someone's control. And modifying behavior to preserve someone else's control over you is not love. It is the slow, daily, cycle-by-cycle surrender of the thing that makes you who you are, your freedom to choose. Comment, I do not trade my freedom for their warmth if this just named the most expensive pattern you have been running, without knowing it had a mechanism. Let me close this out by saying something that connects all 5 behaviors to the single principle that Machiavelli spent his career trying to make visible. The reason these behaviors cost so much when they are ignored is not that the behaviors themselves are particularly powerful. It is that the ignoring is. Your silence in the face of the small violation creates the permission structure that allows the violation to grow. Your tolerance of the selective ledger creates the imbalance that the other person's narrative depends on. Your acceptance of the public-private gap creates the standing damage that accumulates in the minds of every observer. Your failure to correct the luck-based reframing creates the reputation erosion that capability alone cannot reverse. And your adjustment in response to the warmth withdrawal creates the autonomy loss that the cycle is designed to produce. Every one of these costs was avoidable, not through dramatic confrontation, not through the kind of explosive relationship-ending stand that most people imagine when they think about addressing difficult behaviors. Through the specific, calm, warm, measured acknowledgement that the behavior has been noticed and that it is not going to become the terms of the relationship. That acknowledgement, delivered once and delivered early, is the cheapest and most effective response available. It is cheaper than the accumulated cost of silence. It is cheaper than the confrontation that silence eventually makes necessary. And it is cheaper than the structural damage that the behavior produces when it is allowed to operate unchecked across weeks and months and years. Machiavelli would tell you one final thing. He would say, the world does not punish you for what other people do to you. The world punishes you for what you permit. And permission, granted through silence, is the most expensive form of consent available in any human relationship. Stop granting it. Start naming, not tomorrow, not when the behavior gets big enough to justify the conversation. Now, while the behavior is still small, while the naming is still cheap, while the correction can still be delivered as a brief, warm, non-confrontational observation, rather than the accumulated confrontation of months or years of permission that should never have been granted. And here is the final thing Machiavelli would want you to understand. You are not being unkind by naming these behaviors early. You are being accurate. And accuracy, delivered with composure and without aggression, is the highest form of respect available in any relationship. Because the person who names the behavior early is the person who believes the relationship is worth protecting from the damage that the silence would produce. The naming is the protection. The silence is the damage. Choose the naming, every time, not loudly, not angrily, with the quiet, settled, entirely non-negotiable clarity of someone who has decided that the cost of ignoring is higher than the cost of speaking, because it always is. It always has been. And the person who understands that, who names the behavior the first time it appears and holds the naming with composure rather than aggression, is the person who never has to deal with the compounded version, because the compounded version only exists in relationships where the silence was long enough to build it. Machiavelli spent 15 years in environments where the cost of ignoring was measured not in discomfort but in political survival. He watched men lose everything not to enemies who were stronger, but to patterns they permitted to continue until the patterns governed them rather than the other way around. And from the clarity of exile, from the farmhouse where he wrote the most honest account of human behavior ever committed to paper, he sent this warning forward across 500 years to anyone willing to receive it. The thing you are ignoring is building something. It is building the terms of the relationship. It is building the other person's understanding of what you will tolerate. It is building the room's assessment of your position based on what they observe being done to you without consequence. The building is happening whether you acknowledge it or not. The only question is whether you participate in the building by naming what needs to be named, or whether you let the building proceed without your input and then live inside whatever gets constructed. Your silence ends now. Like this video, if any of these 5 behaviors name something that has been operating in your life without you realizing the cost of ignoring it, share it with someone you care about who has been letting something small become something structural. They need to hear this before the cost gets any higher. And subscribe to this channel because the next video goes directly into the specific words and phrases that make addressing these behaviors feel natural, warm, and non-confrontational. The exact language that names the pattern without destroying the relationship.